Okay, we're going to run on time, a very novel concept. But hi, I'm Joan Berman, class of 1974, and a very proud parent, class of 2005 and 2011. Today's forum, covering the bases, Brown Women in Sports, is sponsored by the Pembroke Center Associates in association with the Women's Leadership Council. As a member of both organizations, I wholeheartedly welcome all of you. The Pembroke Center Associates, a group of alumni and friends who support the Pembroke Center for Teaching and Research on Women, organize programs such as this one to connect alumni with the center. Founded in 1981, the Pembroke Center's research and teaching explore social change and how questions of difference, such as gender, race, class, religion, etc., affect our thinking and our world. The Pembroke Center archives preserve the history of women in Brown and Rhode Island women and the intellectual history of feminist scholars. Our co-sponsor, Brown's Women's Leadership Council, promotes women's philanthropy and volunteerism through programs like today's and a mentoring program, the Women's Launchpad. The Women's Leadership Council works to engage Brown alumni with the university. Now it gives me great pleasure to introduce today's panelists and moderators, the reason that you're all here. Sharon Cohn, class of 1989, is founder and executive director of Figure Skating in Harlem, an academics and fitness organization that empowers underserved girls. A former competitive figure skater and U.S. Figure Skating Association gold medalist, she received her master's degree from New York University Film School and a certificate in nonprofit management from Columbia Business School. Figure Skating in Harlem serves more than 225 girls per year with innovative health and educational programs. Sharon won the 2012 Community Leadership Award from the President's Council on Physical Fitness, Sports, and Nutrition. And in 2012, she was invited by the International Olympic Committee to present Figure Skating in Harlem's Successful Youth Development Model. And if that's not enough, she was named the first CNN Hero of 2014. Laura Johnson, class of 1990, serves as lecturer on women, gender, and sexuality studies in the Faculty of Arts and Sciences at Alston Burr Resident Dean of Currier House, and as a member of the faculty of the Graduate School of Education at Harvard. Laura is an interdisciplinary scholar whose work investigates cultural conversations about gender, race, and class in America. Her current courses include Gender and Sports, Gender and Education, and Girl Talk. Reflections on Gender and Youth in America. Laura received her doctorate in American Studies from Boston University and her master's degree in education from Harvard. Sarah Lowe, class of 1983, is a fishing guide and fly fishing instructor with more than 15 years' experience. She has curated an award-winning museum exhibit, The History of Women in Fly Fishing, and is the author of A Guide's Guide to Fly Fishing Mistakes. Sarah was the Catskill Fly Fishing Center and Museum's 2010 Fly Fisher of Distinction and was on the first cast team opening this year's New York fishing season. She is the president of the New York Croquet Club and first vice president of the United States Croquet Association. She is also a partner in High Spirits Unlimited, a travel company specializing in unique fishing trips. Sarah received her master's degree from Yale School of Drama. Jasmine Waddell, class of 1999, is a resident dean of freshmen at Harvard College, where she serves as the academic and residential dean for 400 first-year students. Prior to Harvard, Jasmine taught environmental policy and development studies at colleges and universities, including Brandeis, Boston College, and the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, and continues to publish in these fields. She earned her PhD in social policy at the University of Oxford as a Rhodes Scholar. Jasmine serves as a trustee on the Corporation of Brown University and is a member of the Pembroke Center Associates Council. Jasmine, we thank you for leading our conversation, and let it begin.
Thanks. Thank you so much for that introduction, Joan. Welcome to all of you. I'm so glad that you could join us in conversation. I've had the pleasure of knowing these three women, impressive women, and we've had a continuing conversation about leveling the playing field for women in sports, thinking about sports over the life course, and also thinking about accessibility and who's able to participate in sports. and how we support that and what that means for women and girls and older ladies as well. So with that, I'm happy that you can join us in that conversation, and I look forward to having it with you. So, so Sharon, you've done a lot of work around accessibility in sports. I'd love to know what some of your insights are about sports, sports and the role that it plays in confidence, and the role that it plays in overall well-being.
Absolutely, and I just want to say it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Joan, and to the Pembroke Center, and to be with Sarah and Laura and Jasmine. It's a wonderful panel. So it's great to be here, and accessibility of sports is really an important topic because we assume in middle class or upper middle class society, everyone plays sports. You play soccer, you play basketball, it's just accessible. But the fact of the matter is there are many sports that are still elitist and still serve a very non-diverse population. And the sport that I fell in love with and love to participate in, figure skating, is one of those very expensive sports that is mostly, but not diverse at all. So about 25 years ago, I was working at CBS News and I was invited to meet some girls in East Harlem who wanted to figure skate. They were presented with a hockey program, but they wanted to figure skate. And they asked if I would teach. And what I saw was that when you provide the opportunity, when you provide the safe space, the blank sheet of ice, that young women grow toward health, that they benefit in the same ways kids in more affluent communities benefit from sports. So I saw them learn that working hard leads to a positive change, that you can set goals, learn perseverance. In ice skating, we fall down all the time, so we learn how to get up. Resilience is a big lesson. And so these life lessons, or I like to call them actually life-saving lessons, because they really stick with you for the rest of your life. The young ladies were changing before my eyes. So by providing access, you were really transforming lives. And in that way, I believe sport can be a vehicle for social change. And so it became a hook. And all these years later, we've seen 1,000 girls come through our program. And the results consistently show greater self-confidence, better physical health. They're less likely to get pregnant before adulthood. So there's long-term health benefits, and psychologically less incidence of depression and anxiety, and academic performance. You wouldn't necessarily link it immediately, but sports participation in girls leads to greater test scores and greater academic performances. So if you ask CEOs around the country, female CEOs, the majority have participated in team sports, and they credit that with their performance in the boardroom. So access just opens up the benefit of sport to all, and you don't have to be an Olympic athlete at all to get those benefits.
Very interesting. Switching gears a little bit, Laura, you're a scholar of women, gender, and sexuality. So I'm curious, what role do you think that the changing views about the LGBT or lesbian, gay, transgender community in society has on both women athletes and women's sports? I think that we've seen a lot, there's been a lot of media about this, but I'm curious what you're finding as a scholar.
Okay, so that's a big, complicated question. I would say my broadest answer is that I think we're seeing increased acceptance of the LGBT community in American society, and that is tremendously positive for women athletes and for women's sports. I think it's important to look at the different ways in which lesbians, gays, transgender, intersex individuals have interacted with sports over the years. And for women, the relationship between sexuality and sports has really evolved over the last 130 years or so. So initially, when women started moving into sports in ways that were publicly visible, the anxiety was actually about heterosexuality, that by becoming involved in a domain that was traditionally viewed as masculine, that women were going to take on masculine characteristics, including a kind of excessive heterosexual drive. And so that's what you saw as a kind of anxiety expressed publicly, that women athletes were going to be too aggressive sexually, but in a heterosexual way. And it wasn't until around the 1930s, for a variety of reasons, that the public attention started to shift to associate women's athletics and lesbianism. And that's when you start to see a real social stigma emerging around lesbianism publicly, and the attachment of that stigma to women's sports. And the irony there is that at the same time that there was this stigma being placed on sports that drove a lot of women, both gay and straight, to try to assert that women's sports was in fact extremely consistent with heterosexuality and conventional femininity and traditional gender norms. Women's sports was also providing a safe space for lesbians who were looking to meet other like-minded, either romantic partners or just a social network. So on the one hand, you have this lesbian subculture developing within the world of women's sports, and at the same time, you have a lot of people involved in women's sports saying women's sports doesn't have anything to do with lesbianism. So there's this tension that plays out over the next 80 years or so. But it's, you know, the fact that sports provided lesbians with a safe space in some realms was really positive, but in general, this association has made a lot of women kind of distance themselves from lesbianism in a way that I think has been really divisive within the community. So I think the fact that culturally it's becoming more acceptable is going to make the space much more inclusive. It's interesting because I talk a lot with college athletes, actually, and you see this tension playing out still today. So I've been told by women in the same sport that when they're being recruited, some coaches will say to them, it's safe to come to our school and play for us because we don't have any lesbians on our team, which of course is probably not accurate, as well as extremely offensive. But then they'll go to another school and they'll say, you should come and play for us because we're inclusive and we embrace all sexualities and you'll be safe here. So there's still this real tension, I think, that's playing out. I would also say, maybe we'll have time to talk about this later, I think the big changes are also going to come from the acceptance, increasing acceptance of male homosexual athletes. I think that's going to really change the world of women's sports as well as men's sports. So in a world where Michael Sam is drafted to the NFL, you're really changing the vision of masculinity, which is going to change for things for women athletes. And then the increasing public attention to transgender athletes and to intersex athletes, and the way that that exposes this kind of false binary that we've set up of women and men, and then we can have women's sports and men's sports, and it turns out that it's actually a spectrum, and that binary doesn't really hold up. That's going to change the playing field a lot.
I know, Sharon, in our conversation, you mentioned that figure skating is a sport in which this conflict or this evolving sort of trajectory has had a big place. So in that sport, it's particularly prescient to be sort of very feminine or...
For women, it's been the reverse, because it's very, it's a gay sport. In case anyone didn't notice, figure skating has a large gay male population, and it's safe. It's a safe space for gay male athletes. So when Brian Boitano was asked to go to Russia, he went as an out athlete. That's still relatively recent. But for women who participate, it is very feminine, and it's not safe to be a lesbian in the sport of figure skating now. But again, I really agree that as society evolves, I think people's sexual orientation vis-a-vis sports becomes just less important, and hopefully all sports open up to all people.
Absolutely. So, Sarah, one of the other topics that we talk about is the role of sexism. You really are on the front lines, both in recreational and in professional sports with fly fishing, and I really, I think you have a lot of insights and personal experiences, and you also have been talking and writing about this topic as well as experiencing it firsthand. So I'd love to hear some of your experiences.
A totally different world, obviously, as you were saying. Cleopatra fished with a fly. And in 1496, the first English writing on fly fishing was from a woman, a nun in England. And now we have the #1, the most famous fly caster probably in the world is Joan Wolfe. She is now 87 years old and still, in the world of fly fishing, a rock star. And yet, fly fishing is absolutely a man's world. It was, and it still is. Right now, there are various surveys. People are not that interested, so they don't put too much money into it. But the number of women who participate, the percentage of women who participate in fly fishing, about 18% of the anglers, they say, 18 to 34%. That's how wide the surveys are women. And yet, you know, it's still absolutely a men's sport. 20 years ago, women were stepping into fishing gear that was designed and built for men. After a while, the manufacturers started realizing that, well, they should really sort of appeal to the women as well. And so they added color and lace and flowers to fishing vests and waders. And women pushed back and said, you know, we are just as serious about fishing as men are, and we want the technical gear. It doesn't have to be pretty, but it should sort of match our curvier bodies. And you know, and slowly the industry has responded, which is a very exciting thing. My experience in terms of any sexism, besides the fact that I too wore the waders built for men for years and had to deal with whatever at the fly shops. I take people out fishing. Now, most of my clients are men because, again, most of the fly fishers are men. They actually, before they call me, they have grappled with that question. Do I really want to hire a woman to take me out fishing? So they, fortunately for me, on an individual basis, I don't have to deal with that until we get to the water. And the men find it hard to take direction from women. So I have to alter, clearly, the way I instruct. And I will suggest or cajole, and sometimes I will actually challenge men to do something a little differently than what they want to do, to get them to catch something or actually just do something well. Women are a lot easier. They really want the big hulking guy, understandably, to take them out on the water. But when they have me instead, then there is a great relationship. You know, there usually is, and I just have to make sure that the woman understands and feels comfortable with the fact that I know what I'm talking about. So there's that. On the industry level, actually, the biggest challenge that I had was recently when I published my book. And so it was actually came from something totally different and very unexpected. The publisher had come to me, and over the course of a couple of years kept coming back to me to ask me to write a book. And being a typical woman, I thought, I've got to wait a lot more years until I really know what I'm talking about. You know, a guy would just say, yes, I'll write that book, no problem. You know, I just picked up a rod yesterday and I can absolutely write a book on fly fishing. Women, you know, it takes us a lot longer to admit that we might know something. The publisher insisted, the book is a series of chapters, and there's an anecdote at the top of each chapter explaining, giving a story about what the problem is that's about to be discussed in the chapter. I just used anecdotes from my own experience on the water, and some of the anecdotes included women fly fishers. So when I handed the manuscript in, then the editor said, no, too many women. And I'm telling you, maybe I had 6 stories about women, and it had nothing, it wasn't actually women in fishing, it just happened to be a she fishing. So I just changed the pronouns and said he instead of she, and it was totally fine. I know, and I chose photographs accordingly, so that there are pictures of women fishing in the book, but they're mostly men. The problem came with the cover of the book. Now, I wrote the book. They're not using my initials, they're using the name Sarah. I have never met a guy named Sarah. And so, but the working cover of the book was a picture of my editor with this grizzly beard. Oh, I hated the picture. Most fly fishing books are a picture of the author holding a big fish. Now, I didn't want that myself, because my fish, even my biggest fish, always look smaller than everybody else's, so it didn't seem worth it anyway. But I did think it would be smart to market the book to women anglers. I mean, it is the largest growing, women are the largest growing segment of the fly fishing population. And you figure of all the books written by fly fishermen each year, people who are going to buy those books are going to buy those written by the famous anglers first, and then all the leftover people the women might tend to go towards a book by a woman. So I thought, let's capitalize on that. I know nothing about publishing. Obviously, that was not a good idea, according to the editor. So he put on a picture, a very nice picture, but of a guy fishing. And that's fine, but I can't tell you, and it's been 1 year, literally a year ago today was the first book sale I had over at the Brown Bookstore. And I can't tell you the number of people who keep saying, women, why isn't your picture, or why isn't there a woman on the cover? We want a book for women. And it's just an interesting, the whole thing is just an interesting thing. There's a lot going on for women. The pushback from serious women anglers has been fantastic. We really have marvelous technical gear available to us now that fits our sizes, which works for small men as well as for women, obviously. And there are women's clubs, hundreds of women's clubs, fishing clubs all over the country. There's an international women's federation, all sorts of things. The International Game Fish Association now has, they offer, or they reward women as well as men who have caught trophy fish. They'd always rewarded just one sex, but now they have records for women as well as for men. And obviously a woman could catch a bigger fish than a man, but the nice thing is there are more women listed now, which encourages women to go out and try, and which is a wonderful thing. There's just so much more support out there than there was 20 years ago. 20 years ago at the Somerset Fly Fishing Show, which is the largest trade show for fly fishing in the East, there were 6 women walking up and down the aisles of checking out the booths, whatever you wanted to buy. This year, there were 100 women attending a forum on women in fly fishing in the future. What can we do to help bring this out to more people? And they've already committed to a larger room for next year. So it's growing, and there is now support, which is a great thing. And it's a little world, but at least there is a new horizon for us.
Yeah, no, that's exciting. And I'm sure that many people, I myself, learned so much from you in terms of an industry that I don't think about as much. But it is exciting to see those changes there. And I know both of you have probably some great anecdotes and thoughts about this. I also think that a number of people in the audience are parents. And I'm also thinking about how this sexism plays out in terms of how young people, the young people that you know and love, are engaging with that as well. So I don't know if either of you have some thoughts about sexism or parenting or...
Well, you know, I actually, one of the things I think about access and increased participation. I was thinking about this when both of you were speaking and thinking about the role of parents. You know, one of the things that I've been most heartened by is the explosion of participation by girls and women in sports over the last 40 years. It's just tremendous. If you think, you know, Title IX was instituted in 1972. We had 300,000 high school girls participating in sports, and now we have 3.2 million 40 years later. It's just tremendous. But what we're seeing with this explosion of access is increased competition and early specialization. And for those of you who might have children in the sort of preteen, teen years, as I do, you might be seeing that there's year-round participation now in single sports, and there's club sports, and there's specialty coaches and training clinics. And what's happening is these sports that even the sports that used to be accessible to a wider socioeconomic class are becoming increasingly expensive because of this increased, it's like the flip side of the positive, right? So we have all this participation, which leads to increased competition, which then people start pouring resources in. And so we're actually seeing a kind of narrowing, and some of these sports are becoming increasingly wealthy and increasingly white. Because of the overlay of race and socioeconomic status in our culture. So I think that's one of the things that really concerns me as I look, I want to embrace the increased participation, but think about how do we continue to make sure that is available to everyone.
Well, I get excited now when there's all of a sudden a little girl playing on a football team, or you see a lot of girls soccer getting very popular, and there has been this explosion of participation. I want to flip it on its ear for a minute, because I don't necessarily think more wealth, more money, more competition creates better youth development, can make a better young woman. At figure skating in Harlem, we took some broken down skates in the middle of a basement in East Harlem. We walked 20 blocks to get to the rink. But for me, what sports really does, because very few people make it to the elite status, whether it's the NBA or whatever is the top in your sport, very, very few. But many, many millions of kids who participate can get, as I said, the life-saving skills that they'll apply for the rest of their lives. And I'll speak to myself personally. As a competitive skater, and I obviously, the Olympic medal eluded me in case you guys didn't. Oops.
That might be me, I'm sorry.
That's good. I actually loved participating because there was a sense of belonging. There was a sense of another community that was different than my academics. And yes, I did it on a competitive level, and I sacrificed a lot, and I got up at 5 in the morning. And there was an investment on the part of my parents. But what I came out with many years later was a sense of I can work through any obstacle. I have the confidence to rely on my hard work. I know how to set goals. I have a sense of time management. These are skills that you bring into life. And I think the objective of sports have to be just like the arts. Not everyone's going to be a famous actress. Is what's the developmental piece that they will stick with them for the rest of their lives. And I come back to the falling down and getting up, because a lot of us get knocked down in life after a certain point. And I have this inner athlete that gets right back up, no matter what happens. So at figure skating in Harlem, we have bucked the system. We don't have that much money. We don't go on a competitive track. But these life skills are being instilled in these young women, and here at Brown, one of my students that started at figure skating in Harlem at 6 is a junior, and she got to Brown, and I'd like to think we played a role in that trajectory. So there may be a lot of people invested in the elite athlete, but maybe they're too invested. Maybe the sacrifice or the benefits can be had at a recreational level, and that's okay. We are in a competitive society, but it's okay because, let's face it, when we're in the real world, how many of us find out how many medals did you get when you were 8 years old on the soccer team? Not a lot of us. But
so maybe we need 2 tracks. I think it's really exciting that there are more and more opportunities for those, as you say, few young women who truly are invested and exceptional. And my daughter's lifelong dream, I am so proud that she has one at age 11, is to be a pro soccer player. Whether or not that will come about, the fact that we have a local pro women's soccer team and that she can see those women as models, I think is wonderful. But I don't want that to come at the expense of increased participation for everyone to experience the health benefits and the educational developmental benefits you're talking about. So I think it's really important that we keep both in mind, that there's a role for those who want to be elite athletes, but then there's also real attention paid to the benefits of athletics for everyone and really fitness.
I have to say, because it's probably not as well known, but there's a worldwide movement of sport for all. And when I was in Peru at the International Olympic Committee, there were sports programs in developing countries and countries all over the world simply to help uplift a community, because people feel a sense of belonging when they play sport. So there's surfing in Peru, there's boxing in Rio de Janeiro, there's figure skating in Harlem. There's ways to introduce the benefit of sport to all. And a question I often get is, do you have a kid? Do you have a kid in your program, Sharon, that you think's gonna go to the Olympics? And I said, I don't know, but I have at least 10 that might go to an Ivy League college. Because at the end of the day, education is really the foundation for success in life, and lifting oneself up and one's family, and getting out of that generations of poverty. So sports as a vehicle for social change is really a worldwide movement and is proliferating these access programs, as they call them. And there should be exceptional, elite kids with extraordinary talent should be able to pursue their dreams. But it's up to you as parents to manage that, to really be the parent and say, we're going to do this to a point, but you know what? It's funny, because those of you who went to Brown, go to Brown, obviously you've made it to a certain level. But in the real world, there are people above us and there are people below us, so to speak, on the ladder of success. And most of us are average. Most of us are going to fall somewhere in the middle. And learning how to cope with being okay in being yourself, I think is really, at the end of the day, what sports can teach you, that you can be yourself.
I went yesterday to Lincoln School, which is a girls' preparatory school here in town, and I was listening to the answers of some of the students who were asked about what their favorite traditions were at the school, and the 7th graders, the 8th graders, the 9th to 11th, 12th, they all said, and they're little kids too, one of their favorite traditions that they never wanted to see leave was the assigning of green and white teams. And you are assigned a team for life. And you are a green team member or a white team member. And there are pep rallies, and there is, of course, a sports day. But actually, it's everyone, whether they are athletes or not. So you all are on a team. Those of us who are alums were sitting around the table, and we all compared who's on what team. We all knew what team we'd been on, and suddenly the white team people all were saying, yeah, we're great, and the greens were, this was how many years later, more than I want to think about. But the point is that what was great is that you're assigned a team, you're cheering, and girls are taught to cheer for their teammates. And it doesn't matter if the person is the #1 athlete in the school, but you're cheering for someone who is competing somehow just because she's on that team. And the win of a team belongs to everybody. And so there's a marvelous community that creates. And also there's also, I think, the sports teaches you to win, how to win well, how to lose well, and how to also live with it the next day, which whatever happens. I mean, you might have had a fantastic win, but you need to tone that down a bit for the next day when you're sitting next to the person who lost. And there's some marvelous life lessons, I agree with you, in sports that actually are there for everyone, whether it's the pure athlete or whether it's just the wannabe.
I'm going to jump in real quick. I love the fact that we're getting around to education and the role of education and how education and sport is so important. And I think about the thing that we all share, and that's Brown. So I would love to know sort of what was your interaction with sports at Brown, both either before you got there, once you got there, and then after you got there. I love these stories about the students that you work with, the young people who end up here, lucky them, and also about, I'd love to hear more about your role in the Brown community and sport.
I'll jump in on this one because it's really short. I had nothing to do with sports at Brown. I worked so hard in my youth, skating at 5 in the morning and after school for 8 hours. When I quit and came to Brown, the last thing I wanted to do was get involved in sports. And I was lucky because at the time, Brown wasn't really a jock school. I didn't really feel out of it for not participating in sports. But it gave me a chance to really let go of that identity and explore other things. And frankly, just to survive late adolescence, which hits when we are in these, you know, in these great walls. And you know, I re-engaged and found my love of the sport when after graduation, quite by accident. And I fell in love with it in a different way. Rather than participating, I had the opportunity to teach and see others learn through sport, and that was so inspiring. I had a whole different career trajectory, actually, and sort of left it, because to me, this was where the energy was. This is where you could see transformation, and it seemed to take so little to create such a shift in someone's life. But I don't think I ever hit a Brown football game, I'm sorry to say. Ever.
Well, but I would imagine, though, that your experience here had a lot to do with your ability to connect the experience you had before Brown with that social change piece that all of us are so engaged and captured by here, and put those two things together in your career. So, anyhow.
I'm the exact opposite, except that I was not the athlete that she was. Freshman week, I signed up for crew. I wanted to row. I'd always wanted to row. They didn't offer it at school before I got to Brown. So I signed up, and then I showed up at the first practice, and I found out I was about 8 inches too short to row. But I showed up at every single practice, and I raced for 2 years with the Brown women's crew, and loved it. I'm sure they kept saying, when will she stop coming? You know, but what I lacked in inches, I made up for I had very strong legs, and I had a lot of energy and positive spirit, and so that just kept me going. So I actually was active on that side. Clearly not going to make the Hall of Fame ever. But I also, freshman week, I signed up for the Brown Band. Not playing an instrument. I could read music, but I couldn't play an instrument. But I wanted to be in the Brown Band. So they handed me an E-flat horn, which is sort of a baby tuba, as far as I could tell, and said, and Mr. Christie, who's the head music director at the time, said, learn how to play this, and you can be in the band. I had no idea. So I tried that for a week, and I learned how to play the scale, and then I tried out for percussion instead. It seemed a smarter move. And I actually made that because I could read music better than the other people trying out. So I played the cymbals at every football game and at all the hockey games. And I would not miss. I could not ever miss a game. And my sister was a couple years behind me at Brown, and she swam, and she's the athlete in the family. So, as a good sister, I talked the Brown Band into going to the swim meets and playing at the swim meets too. So I was a great supporter of Brown athletics. You know? But I have to say that it's really I'm really the product of the open curriculum, because one of the things I think is great is that Brown teaches you to go beyond your comfort zone and try something. And I have never been happy to just stay with whatever feels really good, and that's probably what I should do all the time, but I have to try something different, and even if there's a little discomfort, then I have to own it. And so I came out of Brown with that education feeling that I could do anything I wanted, and I better try everything to make sure that I find what it is I want to do. And that's literally been I've had some wonderful careers before fly fishing. And it's because of the education. Obviously, I jump into everything. I can't just sit and watch. I have to take part in it. But it's a combination of the two Brown influences.
I was just saying, you did remind me that at freshman year, they did ask me to be a coxswain, except I had no idea what they were talking about. And I put a sign up to start a skating club about a year into Brown, and 2 people showed up, and I knew them both from my competitive skating career. And 30 years later, they're two of my best friends in the world, and one is here today, actually, in the audience. And we actually got ice time because the boys dominate the ice. We got ice time at Sunday nights at 11 p.m. and it became a training ground for their boyfriends to see how well they could do on the ice. That was it.
I love this crew connection because I too wanted to row crew, and I too went to the introductory meeting, and I was very naive. I was 5'2", and I don't know if they did this when you were there, but there was a really inspirational talk about how you didn't have to be big to row crew, and they talked about this woman on the team who was so amazing, and she overcame the challenge of being too small, and it was all about her training and her will and her drive, and I was so excited. And that was going to be me, and then they said, and she was only 5'6". My dreams crashed right there. And after the meeting, they approached me and asked me to be a coxswain. And I had been a gymnast and a dancer, and I was actually very wary of the fixation on weight for coxswains. And they were interested in me coxing for the men's team, and they said, you know, you can come and you'll work out with the men's team, and we'll weigh you every morning and make sure that you haven't gained any weight. And I declined, and I actually danced instead, and I was part of a student-led company during my time here, and that was where I, really found some community and some leadership roles, and it was a wonderful experience. But that remembering that as you all were talking about crew. Made me think that one of the things that we haven't talked about, which is a real issue in the figure skating world, and increasingly I think in women's sports, is both the sexualization of female athletes and the attention paid to women's bodies, and for high school and college athletes in particular, a real rise in disordered eating, in the fact that it has a name, the female athlete triad, which is a combination of energy deficit and osteoporosis and loss of menstruation. I think we really need to be attentive as we involve more and more women in sports about sort of what are the dangers and how do we protect against them, and to make sure that we're caring for women in all ways, because sport is very healthy when it's done right, but it can also be very unhealthy when the wrong messages are sent to young girls.
You're absolutely right. I think what's interesting about figure skating in Harlem is you don't have to have any qualifications to get into the program except making a commitment. So the bodies of the predominantly African American and Latina girls that we serve are very different than sort of the traditional figure skating bodies, and we have synchronized skating teams. So there never used to be a group component to skating until more recently, last 10, 15 years. So we actually have 3 synchronized skating teams that go to competition. Not only are they the only teams of color, but their bodies are different than the 50 other teams of young little Caucasian girls. And so for us, the body image issues are very different. Our girls feel very comfortable in their bodies, and they're athletic, and they look good. So they're not really haven't crossed into that the other kind of body image issues. But I just want to remind everyone that the Women's Sports Foundation, which was founded by Billie Jean King in the 70s, they've done tremendous research, and actually their research shows that girl athletes have a better self-image of their body image than girls in general.
Yes.
And as far as my sport in particular, it's kind of been a dying sport for the last 10. You have to hit someone in the knees with a crowbar to get, for it to be an exciting sport. No. So it's really taken a downturn. It's taken a downturn because the individual piece of it requires so much dedication for one person to go all the way that now the synchronized skating is kind of revitalizing it. But I actually think it's kind of asexual, figure skating, like the bodies of young girls, and I think it's about trying to just be thinner and thinner and that sort of thing. So I think it changes on race, on class, depends who you ask, but there's definitely a threshold where obsession in any form becomes a negative force.
Yeah, guys, this has been so much fun. And now I would love to open it up to all of you. There are 2 microphones, one on each side. And please just come up to the microphones. And yeah, so why don't you just come up to the microphone? There. Oh, you have it. Okay.
I want to identify myself with Sarah as a resident of fly fishing country on the Battenville River.
Ah.
What I want to do is ask you, what effect has the program for breast cancer survivors, Casting for Recovery, had on the whole industry?
I'm so glad you brought that up. Casting for Recovery is a fantastic nonprofit organization that brings fly fishing and the exercises to women who have suffered from breast cancer and have had surgery. There's a wonderful, they've discovered that the actual casting motions are a fantastic exercise for women who are recovering. And there are retreats all over the country for women, and they're very, very popular. And it's become, they started up in Vermont, and they're just across the nation now. Probably Casting for Recovery has been supported by the entire fly fishing industry, as well as the various breast cancer organizations. But it is one of the top 2 nonprofit organizations or benefits that are supported by the fly fishing industry on a whole, men and women. And at the moment, it is second only to the Wounded Warriors, the veterans programs that are now helping the wounded veterans. And Casting for Recovery has been fantastic. It has introduced women especially who've had no other introduction to the sport of fly fishing. It's brought them out and gotten them on the water. It's a fantastic program that brings medical trained personnel to these retreats so that women can cast and have this great sport event, feel good in the water, but then retreat back and talk to, confer with personnel, medical personnel, and also sit and talk to each other and share their experiences. It has been a marvelous, marvelous positive influence for women in general, to reaching out to women who wouldn't have any other access to fly fishing or be aware of it, and it is supported by the entire community, which is very good. It's a marvelous program.
Great question.
Yeah, I wonder if any of you have explored the analogies and the intersections between sport and the arts, in particular music. So here's a few things. On the individual level, there's breathing. I'm a singer. I also play tennis. You're breathing. You're focused. On a larger scale effort, there are things like skating in Harlem. There's La Sistema, which introduces music to great, lots and lots of kids. There are the life lessons, except for a few of you, there will always be someone better. And there are aspects like, to some degree, the arts and some of your sports are underfunded. And you can also fund them late in life. So I wonder if you've explored, I see a tremendous number of analogies between the performing arts and serious sports. I wonder if you've explored it.
I love this question because this always prompts a vigorous debate in my class every term, because I usually have so I teach a course on gender and sports. It's usually about half athletes and half non-athletes who take the class. Usually about halfway through, after we've talked about all the things that sports can do for you, over a period of weeks, I say, are sports the only thing that can do this for you? And all of the athletes say yes. And I say, what about the arts? I agree 100% that all of the things that we talk about in terms of life lessons can be learned in the arts. And I always have students who champion that, and I think it's really eye-opening for the athletes in the class, and I think it's also eye-opening for the performers to see how much overlap their experience has with athletics in terms of the discipline, the practice, the teamwork.
I'm lucky enough now to have my voice lesson directly preceding my tennis lesson. And my vocal picture, we're talking about minutia of breathing and this and that. And then I'm talking with my tennis pro, and we're talking about the same thing. So tennis is singing, singing is tennis. You know what I mean? It's the same stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree 100%. The one thing I will say is that I think there's a role for general fitness in a health sense that that I would like everyone who can possibly be involved into, and that doesn't have to be sports per se. So there's I guess a slight distinction there, but I agree 100% with you about the life lesson part.
And I'd just like to say I've been tackled by people who think skating's not a sport because we wear sequined outfits. But you know, skating is one of those rare sports that is both a performance art and a sport. And I think it's a strength. I think having the artistry and the athleticism makes it very special. There aren't a lot of sports that combine, there are some. But certainly, I've told, you know, sports are not for every kid either. If someone's committed to an instrument or to the arts, they can gain wonderful, valuable skills. I would argue as well, having some fitness component growing up is really important, but I would never, you know, kids join my program having just seen it on television. They have no clue how cold it is when you get out there at 6 o'clock at night and your feet are cold and your hands are cold, they're ready to quit. So one of the things we actually instill is that you make a one-year commitment no matter what. So I don't care if you're miserable for 12 months. There's value in making a commitment to something and getting to the other side. So quitting is not an option, but certainly after a year, if it's not your thing, it's not your thing. There's plenty of other options, you know.
I would agree entirely with everyone here. I came from theater, was my background after Brown, and now going back to the, again, because I'm the rah-rah kind of person, what you do in theater, you know, going away from the physical components that you're talking about, you are working hard with a group, rehearsing and rehearsing and rehearsing, and to bring something to the stage, and whether it's music, whether theater, whatever it may be, it's the same. There's wonderful interaction between each of the members of the corps, whether it be theater, whether it be a sports team, and I think it's marvelous. I also did what I did after graduate school was do marketing for the entertainment industry, and we looked at theater and all the performing arts very much in this, and sports really follows into that from that point, the consumer's point of view. It's and unfortunately in some ways that's what the athletes have to put up with in some ways too. And you know, we want to be entertained when we go to a sports show as well. And so there's a lot that you can take and give to both of, you know, both kinds of worlds, and it's really very much similar.
I think, and also the community aspects of it, which you're all talking about as well. So the performance, the community, the sort of aesthetics of it. Is a question back?
Yes.
Yes. Oh, thank you. I appreciate it.
So we talked a lot about confidence, and my question is, what advice would you give young women as they transition from being a competitive athlete into, you know, the working professional worlds? Who have always sort of validated themselves through sport?
That's a great question.
Great question. Thank you.
If I jump in,
Yeah,
that's
please.
a really wonderful question that resonates with me. It's not easy always to make the transition from competitive sports. All of a sudden, you have a lot of time on your hands, first of all, which you didn't have before. But I would say, again, there were studies about female CEOs and citing how much competitive team sports has played a role in their ability to be effective leaders. And so you have an edge, I think, coming out of competitive sports. And if you can identify some of those qualities that you learned and that you used as a competitive athlete, you can bring them into any area. And I would also say I have teachers in their 20s and 30s who work for me, skating teachers who are on soccer teams. I mean, the world has changed. People in their 30s and 40s and 50s are working out. And so if it's the love of competition, then I think there's ways to find that in other aspects of life. But if it's the love of participation on a team or that physical working out, that's available to you. I think when it comes to the identity aspect, I am a competitive skater, you know. Personally, I was thrilled to shed that and be, you know, an activist or something totally, totally different, you know. So it's all about knowing yourself, and the confidence that you got from sports doesn't disappear because you're not practicing every day. You have that inside you, and I tell my kids, you have to call on your inner athlete when you need her. You know, when the going gets tough, remember what you did on the field or what you did on the ice and how you can really get through anything. So I wish you the best. Yeah.
Thank you so much. This was a wonderful panel. Like I said, this was a continued conversation, and I look forward to continuing it further. I hope that it continues on into the hallway and that you stop these guys and ask them more questions. Clearly, they're a wealth of information. I really appreciate the questions. They were excellent. And one of the things that this panel showed me is how much we have to learn about sports and the role that they play in people's lives. As young people, as older people, the role on bodies and the medical, physical pieces of it, the psychological pieces of it. And I hope that you enjoy the rest of your weekend. We appreciate you for taking time out to come here. There's lots of information about the great work that the Pembroke Center is doing outside, and I encourage you to check that out as well. But thank you very much. Thank you to the panelists.